All right, we're going holding by the book of Leviticus chapter 18. Again, we're going holding by the book of Leviticus chapter 18. We are in verse 4. This is part 49. I think this will be the end. I think we're going to end actually this verse today. See how far we get. But that's the way it looks. The Torah says, one second, Torah says, again, chapter 18, verse 4. The Torah says, like this. Torah says, Es mishpatai tasu, es hukosai tishmor leches behem ani Hashem, Elokeichem. So Torah says, you shall do my judgments, keep my ordinances, keep the laws that don't make sense, right? To walk therein, I am the eternal your God. So we went through for a number of weeks, Or Chaim Kadosh, and what he brought down, and we're going to finish off with Mori Rabbi Arav Agon or Moshe Moshlita should be well, and he says it's commentary on Chumash, it's commentary Tam V'das, as it's called, and he says Rashi learns, right? We saw Rashi way back that Rashi says that a person shouldn't say that they're going to be exempt from learning Torah, right? In other words, they'll have time since they learn Torah, they should have time to learn wisdom of the nations. Right? That's what he says. Let me just see where he brings it down. Yeah, so Rashi says to walk therein means don't free yourselves from their environment, i.e., you shouldn't say I've acquired Jewish wisdom, and now I'm going to go and acquire their wisdom, right? The wisdom of other people, of the world, in order to walk in their ways, right? That is what Rashi says. So basically, we can understand you learned a lot of Torah, let's say. So now I learned enough Torah. Time to go learn the wisdom of the nations. Right? So it says, my Rebbe over here, he says a person should never be satisfied, right? Should never be satisfied with the amount of Torah they've learned. Yeah, and the mitzvahs that they've done. Right? In other words, you should never be satisfied, but rather all the time a person try and learn more. Try and learn it more in depth. Right? It may apply more to men than to women, but okay. So I should try and learn it much more in depth, in order to, go through all the details, come up with some novel ideas over here, but in general, keeping the Torah the way God wants me to, at a totally different level, only because, what am I doing? I'm continually reviewing, right? I'm going deeper, I'm learning it deeper, let's say, and therefore, why would I have time to learn, quote unquote, other wisdom? Now, we're not talking about necessarily learning, other wisdom. Person has to make parnos, right? You have to make a living, so certain things you have to know. Whatever it is for that job. Okay. Yeah, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about where a person wants to learn secular things for the sake of secular things. Right? For the sake of secular things. So it says over here that a person stay away from evil and anything similar to it, right? And strengthen themselves to guard the Torah, to guard what God commanded us. And he says that's the language. It says the lechet behem, to go in their ways, which means you're going from level to level. So what essentially is he telling you over here? That a person in general can never be satisfied with what they learned. A person has to continuously learn, continuously review, which a lot of people don't like to do, right? But a person has an obligation to, go deeper, not look at Torah the same way they looked at it, last week, last month, or whatever it may be, right? So therefore he's saying you go deeper and deeper in order to keep the Torah, in order to guard the Torah. And why would a person in general want to put themselves in a situation to learn these things, right? To learn secular things. Now again, bottom line is if a person needs to learn something in order to make a living. Yeah, they want to learn, I don't know, graphic arts. They want to learn, marketing. They want to learn, I don't know, accounting. They want to be a doctor, a lawyer, this, that, okay. So there are things you need to know. Probably many classes, maybe you have to get a degree, right, as well. Right? But what's he telling you over here? Raj is saying, don't think, okay, I learned Torah. Maybe I learned a lot of Torah. So now I'm going to go to these other things. Now, he's saying these other things not going to be the greatest things in sliced cheese over here. Right? Could cause the person to go astray in different ways. If a person isn't careful. But in general, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to guard the Torah. We're supposed to keep the Torah. Right? We're supposed to be careful whatever the Torah says. Okay. Very good. Very good. That means a person can reach unbelievable levels. Torah is not just on one level. Right? Torah is not the same as we saw it 5 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever. If a person's, is learning Torah like they were, when they were much younger, so that's a problem. Right? They don't see, you don't see spiritual growth over here. They're learning it the same way. Now, obviously, the explanations don't change, right? Rashi is going to stay the same. The Ramban is going to stay the same, right? Even Ezra is going to stay the same. The Kli Yakar is going to stay the same, right? Commentaries don't change. Yeah, how I understand them and the depth of it, yeah, that can change. Now, how can it change? It can change based on what the person knows. In other words, if a person has greater knowledge. Now they're looking at things with a different perspective, right? Right. I'll give an example. I spent the last number of years finishing up the Talmud. So the last part of the Talmud I had to finish was Kodesh. It's all about sacrifices and temple laws and sanctifying things at the temple and different things. That we're not so in tune with because we don't really have a connection. We don't really have a connection to what it is, right? So therefore, since we don't have a connection to it, okay, you still have to learn it. It's still part of Torah, right? The Chofetz Chaim said on himself, if the temple will be rebuilt, if the temple will be rebuilt tomorrow, yeah, he would be prepared to answer all the questions about sacrifices, right? He would be prepared, totally prepared. Okay, he died, before World War II. So, nonetheless, these laws have to be learned. So there are some yeshivas that's what they dedicate. That's what they learn. They learn all these things over and over and over again. Other yeshivas learn more standard things, right? The laws of damages, the laws of marriage, divorce, these type of things that are more common, right? Or even more practical, the laws of Shabbos, festivals, other things. Okay. So when I finished, and I completed, the entire Talmud. So now I started learning, and I went back to learning things I haven't learned in many years, many years. And and now in the last 6 months, I guess, we're going through. We started from one tractate, about marriage, let's say, and whatever. I went pretty much in depth, very, very much in depth, but it's a whole different way of learning now. Why? Because I haven't, I haven't seen these Gemaras in a very long time. That's okay, but at the same time, from the first time I saw it, or whenever I learned it last. So today it's different. It's a different world, right? Why is it a different world? Because I've gone through a lot more since then. Mind's been developed a lot more, over the years, and now I'm learning it, in depth at a different level, totally different level. Now, when I was younger, okay, there's standard things you learn, right, in yeshiva and afterwards. Okay, very good. Nonetheless, at that point you have a certain level of knowledge. As you get older and you go through more things, you develop more knowledge, deeper knowledge. Usually, you're not going to remember, necessarily, the fine print and all the, and every last, inference and whatever, right? That's why you have to review, obviously, right? But now these are things more, these are things that we have more of a, more of a connection to. So if it's things we have more of a connection to, very good. So if you have more knowledge, on the one hand, it makes it easier. On the other hand, it makes it more difficult. Why? There are different ways of asking questions. One way of asking a question is, what does the text tell me? What does it tell me? What are the repercussions, let's say, of what the text tells me? Meaning, what does it mean? What do I do, according to Jewish law in this case? Yeah, so, so there are different ways, of looking at anything, at any text, right? You look at Chumash, it's the same way, right? The Torah will tell you something, so before a person is going to run, and look at the commentaries, what does the Torah tell me? What does it not tell me? Right? Are there things missing? Yeah. Usually, if a person thinks about it, they may not get every point per se, but if they're thinking well in general, they are going to ask the question the commentaries ask. Right? Same thing learning Gemara, same thing learning, seemingly learning anything else. Yeah. Now, that's a different way of learning. Why? It's one thing when I first learned how to learn, you're breaking your teeth trying to understand what the words mean. Then you're putting sentences together, and now you want to understand, right? Now you want to understand, okay, what's going on? Why is there a difference of opinion? What is one saying the other isn't? In certain cases, are they going to agree? Right? Or are they going to disagree? Or whatever the case is. Yeah? Are there going to be any ramifications? Now, doing this, you may, come to all these picayune details. Maybe they agree, maybe they disagree. What comes out of it in the end? So it's going to depend, right? How a person's learning here. So if a person has minimal knowledge, let's say, then their questions will be different. If a person has greater knowledge, again, we're not saying, they have to be the biggest rabbinic scholar in the world, but, if they have more vast knowledge, then they may say, wait a minute, it says over here like this. It says over here like that. Right? Seems to be a contradiction. Good. Yeah. And let's say it is. The commentators will ask the question. Right? But that's a different way of looking at what the Torah says. Right? There are various levels over here of what, what I'm looking at, what it means, etc. So one level, person can be holding where they just want to basically understand what it says, right? Break down the words, know the roots of the words, very good. Just understand what what the words say. A different level is, okay, now I understand what the words say, what does it mean? Now it can mean a lot of different things, right? Seemingly it's open-ended, right? We'll give an example. The Torah says, don't steal. Okay. Torah doesn't tell me. What would be the obvious question? What would the obvious question? Doesn't matter what you steal. Doesn't matter how much you steal. Doesn't matter what your intention is. Person, let's say, steals something on condition they're going to return it. Yeah, they steal a few dollars saying I'm going to return it tomorrow. They don't tell the person that, right? Now, is that stealing? Because obvious answer would be yeah. Even if you're going to return it the next day, within an hour, within 2 hours, doesn't matter. Whenever you're going to return it, that's still stealing, right? You could say, well, maybe not. He's taking it to use it even though he didn't ask permission. But he's doing it on condition he's going to return it. And let's say he does. We'll make it very easy. Let's say a short time later returns it. Doesn't tell the person they didn't miss it. Right? They returned it. Very good. But everyone's going to say that doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if you return it 1 minute later. 2 minutes later. Irrelevant. You stole it. Right? It'd be one thing you ask the person, listen, can I borrow $5? I'll give it to you in an hour. Right? I'll give it to you in a half an hour. I'll give it to you in 2 hours. Okay. Yeah. It's another thing if you take it without their knowledge, right, and then give it back to them. Right? You're going to say, but they didn't miss anything. There's nothing missing there. Very good. They didn't even know it was gone. Even better. They didn't know it was gone. So if they didn't know it was gone, what happened? He'll say nothing happens. Right? We have concepts and then there's a He enjoyed it. He got benefit. The other person wasn't lacking. Very good. Wasn't lacking. Now let's say, well, let's make it even easier. Person's a multi-billionaire. So a person even stole $100 from them, it's not going to matter. Right? Even if they're going to return it shortly. They'll never miss it. Okay? Right? But the Torah doesn't tell me. The Torah doesn't give me any definitions over here. But if a person has certain knowledge, but even without knowledge, even better. Even without so much knowledge. First of all, should ask the question, okay, the Torah over here says don't steal. That's all it tells me. But then someone may say, wait a minute, aren't there other verses that it says don't steal? Isn't that one of the 10 commandments? Don't steal. So Rashi on the spot over there says, what does it mean don't steal? As part of the 10 commandments, it means don't kidnap. You can say, what do you mean? Don't steal means taking something from someone else. Doesn't matter if it's money, it's an object, whatever it is. Right? Why does this now again, if we understand, all right, a person looks what Rashi says. Good. Rashi says it means don't kidnap. Now why would Rashi say that? Don't steal means, in general, a person stole from someone else without their knowledge. Why would he say it means don't kidnap? Well, it's a simple reason, because other places it says don't steal. The Torah doesn't repeat itself for no reason. So in those cases, the Torah has to explain to me, or I have to understand what does it mean in the context. Yeah, what's going on in the verse itself? Doesn't mean just steal. Don't steal. Right? There are other ramifications, obviously, going on. In this case, what happens? In this case, the case is what? The case is, I already know not to steal. This is something, obviously, the commentaries would ask. right? Or give another example at the beginning of Parshas Vayakhel. Beginning of Parshas Vayakhel, it says you got to keep Shabbos. You're obligated to keep Shabbos. Very good. Well, now, in the previous verses, and there's always juxtaposition of verses here. In previous verses and in previous chapters, what's the topic over there in the book of Exodus? The topic is what? The topic is building the Mishkan, right? Building the tabernacle. You know, the bolts, the loops, the clasps, you know, all these things. You know, the shulchan, the table, the what do you call it, the menorah, all, you know, the beams, all these things. Then the Torah comes along and tells me that I have to keep Shabbos. Now, without looking at any commentary and knowing anything else, what would the obvious question be? The laws of Shabbos are given before. God says in Mount Sinai, right? One of the 10 commandments, keep Shabbos. Very good. Says it before. It's a command before to keep Shabbos, right? You know, don't get into a fire, right? You know, don't, you know, you're not allowed to cook on Shabbos, right? There are things that already have been commanded by Shabbos. So the obvious question would be, you know, just looking at this verse, what's it doing there? Right? That would be an obvious question. Why? Because if I spend 2 chapters or more going through the building of the tabernacle or the Mishkan, as it's known, then I would say this verse is out of place. And normally we say no verse is ever out of place. And the reason no verse is ever out of place, right? What's the reason? The reason is because there's always juxtaposition of the verses. And there'll be a connection to the verse before and this verse. Right? Now, the question is, what is that? You know, what is that connection? So commentators tell us what the connection is, what it's doing there. No verse is just thrown in sporadically. Now, there might be a different issue. There might be, let's say, by the sin of the golden calf. Sin of the golden calf comes up in Parshas Ki Tisa, but the sin of the golden calf is out of place over there. Why? Because one of the sins of the golden calf happened shortly after God gave the Torah on Mount Sinai. This is many, many chapters later. Many, many chapters later, the Torah tells the story of the sin of the golden calf. Okay. So Rashi and others ask, what you know, what's it doing here? Shouldn't be here. It should be much earlier. So Rashi understands, and he says this many times throughout his commentary on Chumash. He says, "Ein mukta mucha b'Torah." Right? Nothing before or after in Torah. What does that mean? It means the Torah was not written in chronological order. It means Moshe Rabbeinu, when he wrote the Torah, he didn't write it exactly how everything transpired. Meaning, he didn't write it in order. He didn't write it in order. Yeah, so therefore, if you have a verse that's quoted, right, that seems out of place, or let's say better, it took place earlier, then you have to ask the question, why is he writing it over there? Why is the Torah now saying, in this place, this happened? Right? So one answer, this is Rashi's answer, some others say the same thing, and that is that when Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the Torah, it does not necessarily mean he wrote it, not the way it happened. He wrote it the way it happened. He doesn't write it necessarily in chronological order. And things could be, you know, things could have taken place earlier than it's written later. Now, others are going to have a problem with this, and others may say that's not the case. There's a reason Moshe put it over here, right? So they have to come up, you know, with the reason that is the case, right? For Rashi and others, you know, it's a good answer, right? Who says he had to write it in chronological order? Yeah. Meaning, he wrote things down, right, the way they happened, but it doesn't necessarily mean he wrote them in the order, in the exact order of that. Could have been something took place years earlier. Could be, right? So again, so then you have to say, well, why did he do that? Why would he write it down in such a way? So he's got an answer. I didn't write it in chronological order, right? I wrote, the most important things. I put it out there. It just doesn't mean it's in the right order, right? It could have happened earlier. Okay, it's not a contradiction, right? It's certainly not a contradiction. It's like, Moshe Rabbeinu's heretic. He wrote it when he wanted. No, he didn't write it when he wanted. He wrote it in a certain order, right? But who says it doesn't have to be the logical order that it was given? Could have written, could have written things down later. Some things down later. You see, by the prophets certainly like that. They're already foreseeing things. Either things are going to happen in the future, right? Or they're talking about things that happened in the past, right? So that's why you have to see anything the prophet says. You have to see what they're talking about. You have to see what the context is, right? And this is one of the problems, certainly with the Christians, because they take a lot of things out of context, right? They don't look at the whole chapter, right? That's the famous thing with Isaiah 53. Now the Christians claim, 100% is talking about JC. Okay, right? The suffering servant. But what happened to Isaiah 50? 52 or 51 or 50 or 49 or 48 or 43 or whatever. It's also mentioned a number of times, suffering servant, every single time, up until Isaiah 53. Who's it talking about? Suffering servants of Jewish people. That's who it's talking about. Now, they'll make a claim, it's a false claim, obviously, but they'll make their claim and say, it has to be talking about JC. I will say, what about the other chapters? The other chapters is very clear. It's talking about the Jewish people, right? So you take one, you take one chapter, you look at it by itself, so to speak, like it has no connection to what was said before or after. Right? It's zero connection. Right? That's obviously taking it out of context, which, a lot of times they do. You have to look at the whole thing. Right? You have to know what they're talking about. And the commentaries will tell you it's talking about this or it's talking about that. Right? At the beginning of Isaiah, you mentioned something that's later. Comes in Isaiah, I think chapter 6, 7, or 8, whatever it is. He's already forewarning something that happened later. Yeah. So he goes to this whole thing. He said, what's he talking about? What's he going on? Right? Why is he mentioning it over here? Because really, it's something over there where Isaiah's going to go into full detail. Right? So again, any of these things, in general, a person can learn it, like they're a 5-year-old, and, you get nothing out of it. You read the story, very good, but you don't get very much, you don't get very much out of it. If a person is learning it the same way they did 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, right? Even though we know the story, we know what happened and this and that, right? There are many levels, multiple levels. And when it comes to Tanakh in general, when it comes to Tanakh, Tanakh is very, it's very rich, in many ways. But you have to understand what's going on behind the scenes. Yeah, if you don't understand what's going on behind the scenes, you get what's going on in the story itself, right? But when you look at the story, there are a lot of questions, right? There are a lot of questions. Obvious thing comes up. We'll just mention one idea. That is by David and Bathsheba, right? So, the Gemara says, anyone says, King David sinned, they're making a mistake. Now, if you read the verses in general, what does it look like? It looks like he desired Bathsheba. He sent her husband to the front, right? Seemingly to get killed, which, the whole thing doesn't look good, right? But he's taking a woman that's already married. How's the king allowed to take a woman who's married? He can have multiple wives, that's not a problem, right? But the wives can't be married to anyone else, right? So there are two things that look bad here. One is that he takes Bathsheba, right? And she's married. She's a married woman. And the second thing is he puts Uriah Hittite, out the pasture, makes him fight in the front lines. Yeah. Now, what happens when you fight in the front lines? Probably 90% of the time or more, you die. Right? So basically, he's going out to die. He's sending him to die. So both things look bad, seemingly look bad. Now, if you read the verses, what does it look like? Total sin, no question. Right? Everybody will say he did something wrong. Everybody will say it. Now, there's information here people don't know. Right? That's why I have oral law for. There's information over here people are not aware of. Right? One is anytime someone went out to war, what do? They wrote their wife a get, a bill of divorce. Meaning, if they didn't come back, then retroactively their wife was divorced. Right? So Uriah Hittite writes a bill of divorce to his wife, goes out to war, is killed. Yeah, she's not a married woman. So he's not taking a married woman over here. That's one thing. Then why does he send him to the front? Right? Because Uriah Hittite did something against King David himself. And he was called Mor b'Malchus. He was rebellious against the king. What's the judgment? What's the status of somebody who is Mor b'Malchus, who's rebellious against the king? What's the din? What's the law? He gets killed. Right? So he had it coming. Either way, he had it coming. Right? So therefore, both things that everyone's going to jump up and down and scream, oh, look what King David did. He took a married woman and he killed her husband. First of all, she wasn't married retroactively. And second of all, he deserved to die. He was rebellious against the king. Yeah. So if you look at the verses themselves, right, what does it look like? It looks bad. And the Gemara is going to say, but anyone says he did anything wrong is making a mistake. But if you look at face value at the verse, what does it tell me? Well, it's like he made a mistake, a serious mistake. He does get chastised by Nathan Anavi, right? And Tehillim Nun Beis, and Tehillim 52, right? But but it's not the sin to end all sins over here, per se. Even if we want to call it something, the Gemara says it's not a sin. Question is, it looks bad. Right? It looks bad, but it's not called the sin over here. So you gotta say, okay, so why does he get chastised? Because his level, he maybe shouldn't have done it. Okay, but it doesn't mean it's a total sin over here. Right? I'll give one other example. We spoke about the sin of the golden calf. The sin of the golden calf looks 100% like the Jews committed idolatry. Clear as day. Anybody reading the verses? And this, people get upset that, what the rabbis say and oral law and different things or whatever. But they'll tell you, anybody will tell you, you look at the verses, what do the verses tell me? They committed idolatry. Right? That's what the verses tell me. Right? Pretty clear. Now, there's a major question here. Now, if the sin of the golden calf happened shortly after the giving of the Torah, on Mount Sinai, how could it be the Jewish people who saw God face to face on the mountain, whatever that means, they're able to get the 10 Commandments? How could it be they fell so fast? And they made a miscalculation. The angel of death, the Satan, whatever you want to call him, shows an image of Moshe Rabbeinu in a coffin, and they made a mistake when he's coming back, and they did all this. Okay. But how could they? The obvious question is, if they had that unbelievable experience in Mount Sinai, whatever that was, how in the world could they fall so fast? Right? This is the greatest generation in the history of man. Right? So some say they heard the first 2 of the 10 Commandments, they died, God brought them back to life. Some say they heard all of the 10 Commandments, that was the case. Some say after the first 2, they told Moshe Rabbeinu, listen, we can't handle this, it's too strong for us. You hear the rest of it and you tell us what it says. But they heard at least the first 2. So these are the 20% that came out of Egypt, right? The 2-3 million people. You want to tell me they fell so fast? And they're so weak, so well, they're human. They really believe. I mean, you think about it, who Moshe Rabbeinu was and what he did and all that. You really think this calf that could walk and eat and talk and this and that. She did through, I guess, through what do you call it? Through sorcery or whatever. Regardless, how could they say this is the one that took us out of Egypt? Makes no sense. Logically, it makes absolutely no sense. So come on, the commentaries over there, and the commentaries make very clear it wasn't idolatry. And they bend over backwards, maybe going, to a second, third, or fifth definition somewhere, and bend over backwards to say this cannot be what happened. For this question. It's an obvious question. Yeah, I don't need to give it over. It's obvious. Yeah, that the nation should not have fallen that fast. Right? So the commentaries bent over backwards over there to show that could not be the case. It could not have been idolatry. Even if you tell me it was only the mixed multitude. Right? It was only the Erev. Yeah, the mixed multitude, the convert came out of Egypt or other place, whatever it was. Right? Wherever they came from. So you can tell me it's only them. Okay. It wasn't the rest of the Jewish people. Okay. Even if you want to tell me that. They're also Mount Sinai. So, what I'm saying, they weren't good converts, per se. They were converts. But they fell. And they made a serious mistake. Yeah, okay. So you can tell me it's not the majority of the people. Okay. Only 3,000 people. It's, not even 1%. Yeah, less than 1%. So you want to tell me it's a very small portion, and it wasn't even the majority of the Jewish people, and they were the mixed multitude. Okay. But even so, they saw everything that happened. How in the world can they make such a mistake? So the point is, the commentaries bend over backwards to say they didn't make a mistake. There was something they did over here that was bad, right? And that was clear that God wanted to annihilate them. That's for sure, right? That there's nothing to talk about. But to go so far to say that there was really idolatry, that they really believed this walking, talking calf, whatever, took them out of Egypt. So you say they wanted some intermediary. Yeah, they didn't believe the calf itself took them out of Egypt. They understood it. It was Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was not here. So they need a manifestation of something. They didn't believe this calf was God. Certainly not. Certainly not. Maybe they gave it power they shouldn't have given it, but they wanted an intermediary. Okay. There's also a problem. Right? Similarly a problem. But the point is, if you, and this is with anything, if you look at Torah at face value, without knowing, what's going on behind whatever the Torah says, then you're missing a lot. I'm not talking coming on to, Kabbalistic intention, right? Again, if you look at Exodus, let's say, we saw this last week, that Exodus chapter 25, verse 8. What does it say? God wants to dwell amongst the Jewish people. Right? So we said, according to Or Chaim HaKadosh, anytime a person does something, it's just like you're bringing God, inside of yourself. Right? You're sanctifying the body, whatever body parts of that mitzvah, whatever it is. Right? Okay. And the more basic question over there, if God is infinite, God represents the entire universe. God's everywhere at all times, however that works. Because he's not bound by space or time. So if he's not bound by space or time, and God says, I want to dwell amongst the Jewish people. I want to see what goes on. I want to be around. Right? I want to be part of all the festivities and all the good things that go on. Very good. One question. Well, that's one very simple question. The one simple question is, if God says he wants to dwell amongst the Jewish people, how is he going to do that? God is infinite. If God is infinite, he's everywhere in every place, how are you going to put him in a box? Even if this Mishkan was, 10 football fields by 10 football fields, I mean, you're talking a huge space. Huge amount of space. However big that space is. Yeah, it can be as big as we think it is, whatever it is. Doesn't matter. Yeah, the point is you're going to take an infinite being and stick him in a box. That would seem impossible. Literally impossible. Right? So how can it be? God says, I want to dwell amongst the Jewish people. There's an obvious question. How are you going to do that? How are you going to be brought down to this world, so to speak, and be put in this box? Whatever, you have to come on to, certain Kabbalistic teachings in order to at least try and explain it. Because otherwise there's no understanding. There's zero understanding, right, what that means. Because practically speaking, it can't happen. So what's the point? The point is there are many things that we see in Torah, we see in the Gemara, we see in Jewish law, we see many things. We see in many things. There are multiple things going on a lot of times. And not only that, there's multiple, potentially multiple explanations. Because there are potentially multiple explanations, yeah, so the depths of what the Torah is going to be very hard for a person to fathom all of it. Right? You take in as much as you can take in, but again, you take it in sound bites. You talk about, one topic. I'll give an example. I was once learning something. I asked a certain question. I didn't see, anybody ask the question. So usually if someone doesn't ask the question, it's probably not, it's probably not a question. So whenever I looked here, I looked there. Finally I saw one of the later commentators ask the question. Asked the same question. I said, great. He asked the same question. I didn't necessarily, understand the depth of the question that I was asking per se. But I saw one of the later commentaries asked it. Now the question that I asked happened to be dependent on like 4 or 5 different points. Yeah, which I certainly wasn't aware of. And it was much more complex than I thought. Right? Now again, not everything's going to be, exactly like that, but this is a good example. This is a good example. In other words, I hit a certain point. Okay. I hit a certain point. But that point, I didn't understand the depth of what the point was. Right? So in other words, if you know more, you remember more, very good. Now what you see is a different thing altogether. Because now you have more information. You don't know very much. Yeah, so you look at it one way. If somebody knows more, let's say, they can look at it 3 different ways. They can say, well, maybe it depends on this. And it can depend on that. And how do I put these 2 things together or not together or whatever? It becomes much more complex. Right? So Rebbe says, we got an obligation never to be satisfied. Never be satisfied with our knowledge because there's always more knowledge to get. There's always more levels to reach. Right? Again, I would say this applies more to men than to women, but, even women want to learn, seemingly at a deep level. They also could. Right? Depending what it is. But still, he's telling you that a person can learn more. A person can learn more in depth. Right? Let's say. They can work harder at keeping the mitzvahs. And going more into detail. Very good. So if that is the case, that's what it means, to go in these ways, because that is going to help a person rise from level to level. Right? They're going to go, more in depth, and they're going to raise themselves to higher levels. Right? To learn it, let's say, at a deeper level. So if that is the case, and that's what our obligation is in general, then how can it be that a person will be satisfied with what they learned, and they're going to say, I'm going to learn the wisdom of the non-Jews, right? I'm going to study, I don't know, Plato, Socrates. I'm going to study higher mathematics. Now, if a person is in a field you need to study higher mathematics, okay. We're talking about where a person studies these things for what purpose? Now, it's going to help you in serving God. That's not the purpose. You're studying it because it's something to be studied. So you study it. It's part of history, so you learn about history, even though it has nothing to do with us. Right? So again, some people will say, I think wrongly, but they may say secular knowledge is a good thing just in and of itself. Yeah, I can learn a lot of Torah, very good, but I have to be well educated in these other things. Right? The Rebbe is saying just the opposite. He said, yeah, you have to be well educated in Torah, right? But at the same time, you have to have walking knowledge of it. Again, it applies more to men than women, but someone asks you something, you should be able to answer like this. We forget, right? So it says you can't forget, you gotta review. You gotta constantly review over here. So the point would be, how can a person ever be satisfied with that knowledge? That knowledge is so deep, you're never satisfied. So if you're never satisfied, when do you have time? When do you have time for this? To learn these other things. Right? So, people out there like myself, if they're liberal arts majors, right? So I get a degree in history, very good. Yeah, most of the knowledge useless, totally useless in a liberal arts degree. Well, people say you gotta have a degree, right? Or just, you were saying earlier, that someone was trying to convince, one of my kids about, the importance of having, a degree. So it depends what it's for. I mean, she doesn't need it, she's doing other things, right? But, this is the brainwashing of society tell you, it's important to have a degree, right? And so I put up there Kaufman's list of the top 5 biggest lies in the world. One of them being Christianity, probably second is evolution. Third is probably this idea of a Palestinian people, right? It might be in the 1 or 1A up there. And I would put getting a secular degree is up there also. Now, in secular world, people say, what do you mean? It's so important and you have to have it and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, for certain things. Certain things you need a degree. Okay. Right? You want to do occupational therapy, you need a degree. You want to go into law, you need a degree. Right? You want to go into medicine, you need a degree. Computers, you need a degree. Okay. Person wants to be a graphic artist, they need a degree? No. Person wants to do marketing, they need a degree? No. Person wants to, I don't know, they do makeup for people for weddings. Yeah, and bat mitzvahs and who knows what. They need a degree for that? No. People who do manicures, pedicures, they need a degree? No. There are many things you don't need a degree for. People say it's better to have it. For what? Right? To be in debt? Take you forever to pay it back? Pay all the loans back? Right? It's a huge lie. For some things, again, I would agree a person needs a degree for. Okay. So you need it. Yeah, and a lot of things you don't need it. Right? Well, but what's the pressure of society? The pressure is this is what you have to do. You want to succeed, you have to have a degree. Is having a degree or multiple degrees, is that define success? People with multiple degrees that struggle. They say they shouldn't be struggling. There's a problem with them if they have multiple degrees. I don't know. What if there's an oversaturation where a person lives in that field? So having these multiple degrees in that field is not going to help you. It's, cutthroat, let's say, cutthroat industry is going to be very, very hard to get in. So you say, so what? I signed up for that. Okay. Was that a guarantee? Not a guarantee. Certainly not a guarantee. Right? But people will take it one step further. I don't want to really harp on this, spoken about it before. People say if you don't have a degree, you won't be successful. It's not true. I know plenty of people successful without a degree. I know people successful with a degree and unsuccessful with a degree. Right? But people will be very quick to say if they have a degree or they have multiple degrees that are unsuccessful, there's a problem with them. That's what people will say. You have a problem. You know what the problem is? God said, I'm not going to bless you with parnasa, even if you have multiple degrees. Right? But people don't see it that way. They'll say there's an issue with you. Obviously, if you have a degree, right, something else. Person, let's say, wants to do accounting. Do you need a degree? I don't know if you need a degree. Yeah, you might need a degree. I don't think, you need no mathematics, okay, but doesn't that say, you know, you might need a degree. Certain things, okay. Certain things I could hear. I could hear you need a degree for. Most things, most things, I don't think so. It depends what it is. I have somebody that went into the family business, went to a business school, known as a business school, a good business school, and I asked him many, many years ago, many, many years ago, how many classes in this business school, how many classes did this business school help you in business? I asked him, very simple question, right? So he came, so he answered, 4-year college, 4-year college. He said 2 classes. That's what he told me, 2 classes. 2 classes actually helped. Now, could be some of the classes gave him background and other things. Okay, he said, practically speaking, I had 2 classes that helped me. Now, 4-year college, you take 50 classes, 60 classes, I don't know. However many credits you have to take. You want to tell me all that money spent for 2 classes? He's going to the business anyway. Parents are going to teach him the business anyway. Okay. Yeah. So maybe it helped, I don't know, for administration things. Maybe it helped for marketing. I don't know. Whatever it helped for. Whatever it helped for. He told me 2 classes. 2 classes. Now you're talking, many years ago. It wasn't expensive in his state, but imagine today it's, $40,000, $50,000 a year. Yeah, I don't think you're getting scholarships. Okay. You know how long it's going to take you to pay it back? Yeah, you spend $200,000, let's say, being nice here, let's say $200,000 for 2 classes. Now imagine if you got a degree, you just paid that money or even a little bit less than that, whatever, in a liberal arts degree. What in the world are you going to do with it? Even if I was a history major, what could I do with a history major? Either they say, you have to get a master's, be able to teach it. Okay. You can teach with it. What else do you do with a degree? Are you going to politics? What do you do with it? Or people major, I know a lot of people major in political science. What political science is going to help you? They'll say it help you to go to law school. I don't know if history degree would help you go to law school per se. Maybe a little bit, right? Say political science help you in law school. All right, it's debatable, right? That's debatable, but people major in crazy things don't mean anything. What are you going to do with it? What in the world are you going to do with it? You can't do anything without a master's. Yeah. Now, there are certain things a person, let's say, learns computer science or learns some other things that may be more practical. We still may need a master's over here. Okay. But if something's more practical, I get it. Right? So then you can do something with it. But most degrees, people want to see that you have a degree. So I just asked this question earlier. What's better? Someone has a degree, they come out of college, whatever, they're just starting out, they have a degree. If someone doesn't have a degree but has, what do you call it, has more life experience. Now, some people, I asked someone this many years ago, they said if I were hired, I would take the person with the degree. The degree says something. Okay. Yeah, but if this person has life experience, you don't necessarily have to train them, as much, but they bring other things to the table. Just because the other person has a degree, that makes them better? Because they learned about art science? They learned about, what do you call it? They took class in art and music appreciation. They took, history class and other things. What makes that person better? Right? But again, people will swear by this. People will say, we want to see someone with a degree. We want to see that, they pass their, they have a college degree. So they say some colleges worth more than others. A degree from the Ivy League schools now, I see what Ivy League schools are all caked up to be, what's going on in their universities, even though I myself went to one. Okay, right? Even so, right? Even so, you want to tell me these people are more intelligent because they did better on their SATs and other things. Okay. Yeah, does that breed morality? So a lot of things went on in Ivy League school, didn't breed morality, I can tell you. Right? I'm not going to go into detail, but I could tell stories. Did not breed morality. Not going to make somebody more moral. Yeah, but people don't care about that. Unless they're signed up, they get a job or whatever, and then there's harassment or whatever. Okay, that's a different issue. Well, let's say that's not the case. I mean, what, that makes them better? Because the top 1% of college students, they must say something about their brain capacity. Okay. All right, but what about everybody else? Everybody else. Majority of the time they're partying. They also get a degree at the same time. Okay. Well, what's going on there? As Victor Mill said many, many years ago, or 50 years ago, he said, go to a lot of things, like narcotics, booze, and women. That's why, or vice versa, whatever. People want a degree because they need to get a degree. Okay. They're one of the biggest brainwashing machines in the world. Nothing to talk about. Because most people never use it. Certainly if they're majoring in liberal arts, right? Let me just curious over here. What the percentage is. Let me get liberal arts degrees. Let's see. Let's see. How many people get liberal arts degrees? Okay, they're down. Okay, let's see. So degrees is going to a 2-year level, 90.6% liberal arts graduates. Okay, that's something else. Um, yeah, let's see. 1 second. 800,000 liberal arts degrees. So how much is that? How much is that? Let's say, I guess in the year 2023, 63 million had degree holders. So you had 800,000 liberal arts. Okay, so you want to say so 63 million, so you got less than 1 million. So, okay, it's not a high percentage. That would make sense that it should be a high percentage. Why? Because you can't do anything with it, right? Someone can't do anything with it. That's already in 2000. That's already in 2023. So what's the most common degree? Business, health, and social sciences. They want to say. Make up almost 40%. Yeah. What's the percentage of people in the US have a bachelor's degree? Some call, let's say, it's a bachelor's degree. Age 25 over, 35%. 25 to 30 is 37%. So you don't even have 40% are getting degrees. Right? It's okay. So I would say it's not such a bad thing. But again, you need them. For certain things. Certain things, you need them. But if someone's going to go through that, they're going to go through that and they're going to pay all kinds of money or get all kinds of scholarships or whatever it is. I would think you want it to be practical, something you can use in the future. Yeah. So if you tell me it's 40%, if you tell me it's 40%, that means 60% are getting something that would seemingly be more, appropriate. Why? Because you can use them. Right? But still, 40%. Think about it, 30, 38%, whatever it is. 38%. So you're talking hundreds of thousands of people that have a degree they can't use. So so let's say in that statistic you had 800,000 people. 800,000 people got these degrees. 800,000 people. Let's say the average degree is what is let's say $100,000. Let's say $150,000, right? But by the time they're done, right, to get 800,000, you're talking millions. Spent millions of dollars, right? All these people for a degree they can't use. There's no usage. That they have to do something else. Even if a person's got a degree in, let's say, in English or something like that, you need a master to do anything with it. You can't necessarily do anything with you can't necessarily do if you want to teach it or whatever, right? So it could be some things maybe you could use even without a master's degree. Okay. Well, think about it. That I mean, 40%, 40%, is I think is high. You get all these people that can't do anything with it, so they have to find something else to do. So what, so they can, they can write a little bit better, maybe. Now a little bit more mathematics, okay. But if you want to work in the store, everything's computerized. You don't have to think, right? Even if you're not so good at math, yeah, someone gave you, I don't know, you spent $2.53, they gave you a 10. You're not racking your brain to figure it out. Put it in the machine, how much they gave, and they'll tell you, spit back how much you have to pay back. No, obviously some things are easy, you don't really have to think so much. Okay. Right? But everything's done by computer today. You don't have to think. Right? They don't have to think. So you don't need it. Basic math you should have, okay. But how far does that go? Right? Not practical. Right? A lot of it may not be practical. Anyway, the point would be if you need it for a degree, it's one thing. Then you have to take it. Right? Then you have to do it. Okay. So there are things you need a degree for. Very good. And if it's something you're not interested in getting a degree, you're not interested in doing anything where you need to get a degree, and there are a lot of things like that. So what's the point? Just to say you did it? Just to say now you're more well-rounded? I mean, to put yourself in that level of debt, or parents are in debt, whatever it is, in order to do that, so they're now more well-rounded. But they're not going to use the information anyway for the most part. What are they going to do? Use something they learned in college, and they're going to, for 5 minutes to speak to someone at a cocktail party, mention something they learned. I tend to doubt it. And as the years go by, how much is the person going to remember anyway? Right? Anyway, let me take some questions here. Someone asks, does yeshiva teach the prophets? No, most of them don't. Most of them will say, if you want to learn, you do it on your own time. The main focus in yeshivas is Gemara and Halacha. They learn Musar also, right? They also learn Musar, but that's the main thing. Main thing is learning Gemara, and the main thing is learning Halacha, is learning Jewish law. Prophets? No. Jewish philosophy? No. They won't have formal classes on it, right? There won't be formal classes on it. But if you want to learn it, you learn it on your own. So, there are Baal Jewish yeshivas that will teach that because guys don't have the background, right? So they give classes in that, but, if you start giving classes in that, then it takes away from from the more important thing, and that's learning Gemara. That's the most important thing, right? So most places will not take time, even if it's an hour or half an hour, to give a class in that. They won't do it. They'll say do it before you learn, do it after you learn, do it in between when you have a break. But it's not going to be on our time, right? That's not something you're going to focus on, and that's not the focus, right? You say, but if Torah is the main thing, why don't they have a chumash there? They might get a class, let's say on a Friday or something like that. They might get some places may have, one of the rabbis, give something over in Chumash or whatever. We'll be in Tanakh usually, right? But again, that'd be extracurricular. Now, most people would say, what do you mean? Chumash is the base of everything we do. Tanakh is the base of everything we do, right? A lot, some things. Okay, right? A person should know it. Right, in order to be considered a rabbinic scholar, you need to know all 24 books very well. How many people today know Tanakh very well? There are big rabbis. Yeah, they spend time learning Tanakh. they're big time rabbinic scholars. Yeah, they put in effort learning Tanakh. You know, everybody like that? I don't know. You know, I know people who, yeah, they spend time learning Tanakh, but it didn't come at the expense of learning Gemara. In other words, their main focus on Gemara, but they found time to learn Tanakh also. It's important, but it won't be part of the curriculum. In some places, again, more for like people who are starting out to learn, let's say they didn't grow up religious or whatever, so they will, they'll give classes in that, and the reason they'll give classes in that is because they don't have the background, so they're going to give them the background. But someone grew up religious, and they're going to religious places their whole life. They only learn Tanakh when they're younger. Right, there are a number of places in Tanakh that seem to contradict the Torah. So yeah, you have to be well versed. We said before, Tanakh is an ocean. It could be one day start from Sefer Yeshua, where go through it. Yeah, but go through it properly. And the depth. Yeah, there's a lot there, but there are places where it seemingly contradicts. Right, so that's why they don't teach it in depth. Right, so kids learn it. They learn the stories, different things, whatever, but they don't learn it in depth. Right, they don't learn it in depth for that reason. Usually, once the kid's gone through the system till they get to high school, so they get to what we call yeshiva katana, the age of 14, usually 13, 14, then they don't touch Tanakh after that. Unless they want to do it on their own, unless they want to learn it more in depth on their own. Yeah, there are people, they learn with other people and go through and do it in a deep way. Most people don't touch it. And I started many years ago, starting with Yoshua. I used to learn Saturday nights, in the winter, for like an hour, try to cover a certain amount of ground, and other times when I had more free time. So I'm holding by Yeshayahu, by Isaiah. So whatever, working my way through. It's taken years with a lot of depth. I mean, you look at the Radak, you look at the, you look at the Malbim, you look at the Barbanel. I mean, like it's serious stuff. Like, what's going on behind the scenes. I mean, if a person knows how to learn, good, they can learn it on their own. If not, they should learn under someone who, knows what's going on. It's very deep. I mean, there's a lot of depth there. Tremendous amount of depth there. So simple answer is no, yeshivas will not touch it. They will not teach it. They'll tell you to do it. They'll tell you to do it, in your own time. Again, whether it's going to be after learning, before learning, you have a break, you have 2-hour break, 3-hour break in the afternoon, or 2-hour break, let's say. In the afternoon, you can learn that if you want. If you have, let's take a nap or whatever. But unless it's somebody who hasn't really learned, they'll give you a class in that. I mean, when I went to yeshiva many years ago, so we had classes in that. We had classes in Chumash. We have classes in Tanakh. I don't know, Chumash we did. Started from Breishit, went through Chumash and Rashi a lot. I wouldn't get that far, but over the year. But certainly, the most important thing was learning how to learn Gemara and Halacha, right? And learning different things about Shabbos and blessings and and all that practical things, right? Practical things you have to know. So but these other things, so I was taught by somebody that was very big into Jewish philosophy, and that's how I got interested in Jewish philosophy through through Ramchal and Derech Hashem, through Chatzkel Levenstein's got a lot of books on. He was the mashgiach of Panovich in the Meir Yeshiva, student of Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz, and he has a whole bunch of works on about Amuna, working on character development, and very strong Jewish philosophy, never been translated. So I got into that. I got into the Ramchal. I got into to other things, and these things like changed my life, like literally, like Chos Vavos through the heart. I mean, it's it's a game changer, and in many ways. And you look at the world very differently. If I would have learned, Sharpi Tachon or, the gate of faith and belief in God and a lot of the Chos Vavos, long time ago, or the Ramchal and Derech Hashem a long time ago, would have saved a lot of aggravation. tremendous amount of aggravation. But you learn when you learn it, right? But this is a game changer. Now, in yeshiva, you're not going to learn it. You may hear schmoozing, may give a schmooze on certain things. Not going to go, from the beginning to the end of the book or whatever, But I remember learning before Shavuos. So Nefesh Chaim in the fourth gate is all about the importance of learning Torah, right? So we went through that. We learned that. I mean, the other three gates nobody touches because a lot of it's all, according to Kabbalah. A lot of it's Kabbalah. There's also whatever, important things. A lot of people don't touch it, but it's game changer, potential game changer, right? The person, has to be ready for it. There's no question. There's no question. But at the same time, our mainstream type of place is going to learn them. No, they're not going to learn them. I remember when I had my own learning center. So once a week we went through. I spoke for half an hour. Went through the Ramchal, went through Derech Hashem. Like these guys never touched it. Never touched it. Guys learned. Been learning for years and years. It's a book people never touch. Why? A, it's a hard book to go through because it's written in a philosophical language, and B, a lot of it's very much steeped in Kabbalah. But I didn't speak about the Kabbalah part. Just basically, how the soul works, what reward and punishment is, why do people suffer, and the purpose of the nation, like, how spiritual forces work and all that. It's okay. Like, a person has an idea without delving into like the depths of Kabbalah and this and that. You have an idea how things work, what the world looked like before Adam and Eve sinned. Like these are important things. These are important things. Some people never touch it in their lives, but it's an important thing to go through. I had somebody, a very funny story. I'll take some other questions in a second. Somebody, rabbi reached out to me. Somebody was converting someone. I guess referred this rabbi to me, and whatever. It's his first real pulpit. He was like assistant rabbi somewhere, and then became a full-time rabbi, in a certain place. And there was someone who was in the process of converting, and someone actually was a medical student. I think they were a medical student, and they had all these deep questions, all these things. They were going to the book Derech Hashem, so they had all these, like deeper questions. So this person thought, like, what are they asking these questions for? Like, spiritual forces and evil inclination and different things. Like, take it for granted if you grew up religious. So take these things for granted without, knowing necessarily the intricacies or whatever. So the person said, that's weird. So the person tells me, like, much younger than me. So, okay, whatever. So he said, this is like weird. This is very strange. The person asking these type of questions. Yeah. So anyway, so we started talking, and I said, do you want my response? I said, there are people looking for depth in the world. They're seeking answers to big questions because either things they've gone through or they want to know or whatever. So I said it's a normal thing. I come across it a lot. People want more depth. Okay. So this guy said, what should I do? Again, this person thinks it's strange. So I try to explain why it's not strange. Okay. So the person asked me, this rabbi asked me, what should I do? This person starts asking me questions, different things. What should I do? I said, I get a great idea. I said, I'll give you my free advice. My free advice is, if you don't have the book, go buy it. Go buy the book Derech Hashem by the Ramchal and go through it. And learn it. That's what I told him. Yeah, that was my free advice. I said, you see why people ask the question. Yeah, why they have these questions. Because these are basic things. Everyone has to know. I think Jews and non-Jews. Because people say, oh, it's so strange. Teach it to non-Jews or whatever. I mean, some Jews here also. But, why would you teach that? I said, first of all, I'm not teaching according to Kabbalah, that's for sure. But second of all, these are basic things everyone has to know. Guys who are in my learning program, thank me afterwards. They said it's a game changer. And it gives them a different way of looking at the world and what's going on, and how it works. Without the Kabbalistic aspects. It's a game changer. I said, you're right, that's why I taught it. That's why we went through it. Yeah. I did it a number of times. It's an important work. No question. So I told this rabbi, I got a great idea. Learn it. Buy the book and learn it, and you'll see why. Right? But to think it's weird today, people want answers. People want depth. Yeah, that's what they want. They don't want simple answers per se. Someone's going through a hard time, suffering, whatever. They see what the Ramchal says about why people suffer and why righteous people have it easy. Sorry, why evil people have it easy. So they're going to understand how it works, and what's going on. Now, it still might not be easy to go through whatever they're going through. Okay, but now they have a better understanding. That's not all random, and that the more they do, why are they getting punished? Why is it harder? Why before was it easier? This and that. Okay, he addresses it. He definitely addresses other places. Other great commentators also address it. I'm saying that's one address. That is certainly one address. But it's a game changer. I'm telling you. If I would have known this when I was a teenager, or a late teenager, this would have changed my life. I can't even tell you how dramatically it would have changed. Dramatically. Yeah, I would have answered up so many different questions. So many different questions. Okay, so you learn it later. You get it whenever you're ready to get it. So we say, I wish I had it then. I wish this happened then. Okay, but didn't. Right? So I had to go through the school of hard knocks. But now what happens? You read this, everything gets unraveled. Everything gets unraveled. When I had this question, like the whole rest of the world is cracked, or I have to see how Orthodox Jews live, even though people thought I was out of my mind because, like, oh, you think you're so great, whatever. You think the whole rest of the world is cracked? Yeah, it is. And I got the yeshiva, my questions were answered. Within a few weeks. Most questions I had made sense. They were able to make sense of it. Why were they able to make sense of it? Because they had Torah. Torah made sense of it. Didn't mean life as we see it every second is going to be easy. Doesn't mean that, but you have the tools to deal with it. Because the Torah is going to answer what you should do. And even if it's hard, so what? Yeah? It gives the person equilibrium. They know, even if they get hammered or whatever, they know they're doing the right thing. They know that they're doing what God wants, right? But the hardship is, yeah, but why am I getting slammed? Okay. Well, that's part of it. That's part of the test. Are you going to stick to me, God says? Or are you're gonna give in because it's hard? The life is hard in general. Many different things, as we always say, right? But at least intellectually, right? Through the intellect, we can understand. It makes more sense. Putting it into your heart, putting it into your heart is harder, much harder, right? But you got to start somewhere. You got to know what to do. That's 97% of the game right there, is knowing what to do. Doing it, okay, that's harder, right? That 100%, is going to be harder, right? There's no question. That is going to be no question. But, as we always say, if we had that information earlier, we'd look different today, maybe, right? Maybe. But it's a game changer, and it should be a game changer, right? It should be a game changer, right? There's good reason, right? Because of what it represents and what it means and how it impacts a person's life, right? It's a huge thing, right? It's a huge thing. Someone says, I think some inventors didn't have degrees. Could be, right? Could be, right? It's not, the point is, it's not the end to end all things, right? It's definitely not the end to end all things. And again, people will swear by it. People will say you need to have it. Let's say, make it very simple. Let's say someone's already got an established business. Say they're a makeup artist. Yeah, they're doing let's say they're doing relatively well. Okay. What do they need a degree for? Maybe, they can take a course or two, and let's say in marketing, they want to market themselves, get themselves out there so people, will see them, etc. Okay. Or they can pay someone to do it. They're doing well enough. But in general, someone's doing okay. and they don't have a degree, what's the degree going to help them? In this case, what's the degree going to help? It shouldn't help them. It shouldn't make one bit of difference, right? There are people, I know someone who does, what do they call it? Let's say social media management. So, get people's, products out there, whatever business, they're in, get more people to see it or whatever. There are people, let's say English not the first language, right? Not their first language. And guess what? Guess what? They're doing just fine, So even if they don't speak as well, they probably have other people that do. Or if not, they get by. They get by with their broken English. Yeah. Or they get other people do it. Right? But you'll say, isn't it better? They should be more well versed. So, if they talk to clients, they don't sound like a foreigner. Yeah, probably. Probably better. Right? Does that mean it's going to make a person more successful? Now, some people will say yes. Some people 100% will say 100%. This will get them many more clients. Why? Because they speak better. Right? But there are plenty of people out there, I know someone deals with a lot of these people. And English, some are not their first language, and they're doing okay. Now they want to do better. They want to expand. They want, they want more clients. They want to make more money. Very good, right? So the person can help them. Okay, right? Not like, they're necessarily starving right now, but you see, there are a lot of people even if they don't speak the language properly. They're okay. They're paying the bills, and maybe more. They're doing a lot of good things. And English ain't their first language. Now there are people that will say, I'm going to work very hard, to make sure, I speak English properly. Yeah, especially if they live in America. Good. They want people to understand them. They come over, they come across better. This and that. Okay, I hear that. I hear that. But guess what? They they get other people to do it. They don't, they can focus on other things. They don't need necessarily to focus on that. Right? But if someone doesn't necessarily speak the language so well and they're successful, you're gonna say, wow, if you learn English better, you do exponentially better. Oh, maybe. Maybe it's true. Maybe. Right? But there are plenty of people out there. English is not their first language, and they're doing fine, even if they're broken English. Yeah. Okay. Some people better, some people worse, whatever. But there are people doing, tremendously well and are successful regardless of whether their English is very good or not. Right? So again, most people would say it's probably better to communicate with people and whatever, speak English better. Okay. Right? It's probably true. Right? It's probably true. But if you see people that are successful and they don't do that, right? So, people say, well, that should be a major detriment. They shouldn't be making so much money. You're right. Maybe they shouldn't. Right? But who's the ultimate benefactor? Who wants to see a person succeed or fail? It's God himself. So even if you don't speak the language, guess what? You can make plenty of money. You still make plenty of money. Yeah. Or you can speak English very well and not make money. Right? But God's the X factor. Well, see, some people don't look at it that way, and people will say, you got lucky, or this happened, or that happened, or right. But again, we have an obligation, as we said. We got an obligation to put your best foot forward. Putting your best foot forward is never a guarantee. It's never a guarantee for success. You have to do it. Everyone agrees. Everyone agrees you have to do it. Okay. As a guarantee, as I said before, someone can say, well, you got 2 degrees. Why aren't you making money? There must be a problem with you. What if you're in a field that doesn't make money? Doesn't make so much money, but you're idealistic, and that's what you want to do, and you'll scrape to try and make ends meet. So they say, well, it's your fault. It's not their fault. They're in a field that doesn't make a lot of money. But somehow, they make it through. There are people idealistic, okay. Now, up to a point. Up to a point. I don't think a person's going to, though the whole of says you're not going to change what you're good at, because then you'll hate what you do, and then you won't be good at even that, and then you won't make any money. So, So you gotta love what you do, right? Sometimes you have to do things even if you don't like it, because seemingly you have no choice. But in general, you gotta do things you enjoy doing. Right now, even though you enjoy doing it, doesn't mean you'll be successful. Yeah, how many people, back in the day or even today, right? I'm not saying it's a good profession to go into. A person wants to be an actor, an actress, right? So they go to Hollywood. Yeah, trying to find bit parts, this, that, whatever. Most people obviously have to do other things because, most people don't make it, right? Or if they do, it takes a while, right? It takes a while for them. Okay, so they understand that. So that's one thing. That's one thing. But people would ask the question if they're in a field that should make money or should make a lot of money, why aren't you making money? That would be the obvious question. In other words, the person's a lawyer. Yeah. So the person's a lawyer. Don't lawyers make a lot of money normally? You would think. You would think it's a field that people make money. So what if you have a lawyer that doesn't make a lot of money? Say, oh, it's a problem with him. Must not be good with people. Must not be so smart. He must be this. Must be that. Well, if he passes, took his LSATs and he passed, so let's say better, passed the law exams. Yeah, the law boards, whatever you call them. Yeah, we can't be a dummy. No, somebody can't be a dummy. It's study hard for them. Person, 4 parts of a CPA exam, right, to be an accountant. Okay. Yeah, you can't be a dummy if you pass them. For sure not. Right? So, okay. Right? But so again, even if a person's not a dummy, there are other things that are going to make a person either successful or not. So you say, well, doesn't it matter, how they relate to other people and how they speak to other people and how they come across? Sure, that's part of it. That's part of it. But at the end of the day, what's the bottom line? The bottom line is, doesn't matter what I do or what I don't do, right? I have to put my best foot forward, but is that a guarantee for success? Not a guarantee for success. Totally not a guarantee for success. But at the end of the day, you have to do it. That's what you're obligated to do, right? So, so a person could be, would be very quick to say, oh, if a person's in that type of profession, the average salary is very high or whatever, after so many years, then there's a problem with that person. Now, that could be the case. Let's say. Let's say they don't have a bedside manner. Let's say, they come across very gruff or who knows what. So they may lose clients. Okay. Now, people will say that's the reason. That's the reason they're not successful. But what's the real reason they're not successful? Because God didn't want them to be successful. Why? I don't know. He wants them to struggle. Yeah, he wants them to be more humble. He wants whatever God wants, right? But at the end of the day, that's the bottom line. So, it's not about degrees or anything else. There are people without degrees, but let's say they got a nice job doing whatever because it protects you, their connections, right? It had nothing to do with it had nothing to do with knowledge or anything else, family business, whatever it is. Whatever it is, they learn the ropes, who knows what, but it's protection, right? They got connections, let's say better. Call it protexia, right? They got connections. So, we had to write a senior statement. And I was in 12th grade. So my senior statement was, it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? It's all about connections. And money's only a medium of exchange. That's what I learned. That's what I learned after 12 years. 12 years. It's connections. A lot of it has to do with connections. Can a person make it on their own without connection? Sure. That there's no question. The connections help. They can certainly help. They can certainly help. But at the end of the day, the question is going to be a person successful or not successful, not based on their own effort. Right? Totally not based on their own effort. You have to put your own effort there. True. Right? But success will be determined whether God wants you to be successful or not. That's the bottom line. Right? So yeah, at the end of the day, you got to pray a lot. You got to pray a lot, no matter what field you're in. Even if you are successful, who knows you're going to be successful tomorrow? Right? You got to pray every day that it stays the same. Right? Someone came to my Rebbe once before Rosh Hashanah, and he wanted a blessing. So my Rebbe asked him, "What blessing do you want?" He said, "Listen, I've been very successful this year." Right? It's a Jew talking. Yeah, I've been very successful this year. and I don't want God to interfere in my business. Next year. I'm doing so well. Tell him to keep his own, tell him, to mind his own business. He shouldn't interfere with mine. And then he asked. I said, I'm glad you get these questions, not me. I was like, how do you have patience for that? So he said, I can't give you a blessing like that. What do you mean? God should have anything to do with your life? How do you think you were successful in the first place? It's like it wasn't based on your own intellect and this and that. You might think so, right? But God's helping you across the board. And you got to tell God to mind his own business? Kind of, I understand to a point where the person's coming from, but like, if God runs the world, anything, just, bother everybody else. Don't bother me. I'm on a roll, right? I'm on a roll. Don't bother me. I'm doing well. Stay out of my life. Kind of silly thing to ask, right? You know, I don't know exactly how religious this person was or not, but I see by the question, it's a problem, right? It's a problem with the question. But at the end of the day, God's the one in charge. That's it. He's the one calling the shots. Whether we have a lot, whether we have a little, and even if a person, let's say, lost their fortune. Well, guess what? There are four people. I mentioned this last time, Pirkei Avos. There are four people considered dead, right? The Gemara in the Dharam says, right? One is someone that's saras. One is someone who's blind. One is someone who can't have children, right? Doesn't have children, and one is someone who's poor, right? So, it could be a tragic thing. It could be a very hard thing, to go through. But if a person thinks about the bigger picture, say, hey, God could have taken my life and say he took my money, right? So really, he could have killed me. You probably deserve to die. Okay. Yeah, but so God had mercy, right? For different reasons. Maybe family needed them, other people needed them, whatever it was. So God keeps them alive. So instead, he says, okay, I'll make an exchange. I'll make an exchange. They have all this money, I'm gonna take it away. I could have taken their lives, but I didn't. So instead, I'm going to take away their money. Now, let's say little birdie whispered in our ears, and the ears of somebody, let's say had a lot of money and then they lost it. Seemingly they lost it overnight, right? Let's say. Wasn't gradual. They lost it overnight. Yeah. So now little birdie told them that, I'm giving you a choice. Before it happened. So I'm giving you a choice. I can take your life now. Tomorrow you'll be dead. However, it's going to happen. Right? You won't be in this world. Or I can keep you alive for the next, I don't know, next 40 years, 50 years, whatever it is. I can keep you alive, right? And, you'll survive from this or whatever, but I'm going to take away all your money. Now, it could be, some people say, you know what? I'll take, take me now. Take me now. I'd rather die now, get all the benefit, get all the benefit than, have to go through that. Right? Other people are going to say, okay, better take the money. I don't want to die. Right? At least not yet. Right? I'm not ready to go. Right? I still have a lot to live for. Okay. So I would think there are a lot of people probably sign up for that. You're not given that choice. You're not given that choice. Right? And after the fact, even if someone told you that, when a person struggles, I don't know, is that going to be consolation? Someone once told me they didn't mean anything, bad by it. They said, listen, you hit rock bottom, the only place you can go is up. Well, that's true. That is very true. I had a hard time with that statement when the person said it, right? But, I understand where they're coming from. It's true. You hit rock bottom, you can only go up. I mean, if you hit the bottom, you can't go further. So there's no place to go further. Right? You already hit the bottom. Okay. So, you got to pick yourself up. You got to, deal with these issues. And some days are easier, some days, some days are harder. Okay. Right? But in the bigger scheme of things, there's a test here. There are two tests, right? Someone's got money and they're going to help others with it. They're going to realize God's giving you money for you to help others. Or you're going to be haughty, right? You're going to be haughty and think, no, let them work, let them do other things. I earn my money, let them earn their money, blah, blah, blah. Right? You're not going to help others. That's one thing. Right? Then you have others. Then you have others that, let's say, are poor. So the question, so the trial of poverty, is, are you going to be happy with what you do have? They're both tests, right? Most people would probably say, I'd rather have the rich test. But I saw somewhere, I was telling someone the other day, and I don't remember where I saw it, but I saw once brought down 1 in 1,000 rich people go to Gan Eden, go to paradise. 1 in 1,000. Yeah. Why so few? Because if you have money, you have 100, you want 200. 200, you want 400. You're certainly not giving it away. You certainly don't want to give it away. What's your goal? Your goal is to try and keep as much as possible. That's your goal. You have no intention of giving it away. Now, you got these billionaires giving away most of their money. Okay. Right? That is commendable. That might be their own haba right there. That might be their portion of the world to come. Right? But what if they give it the garbage? Well, if they give it the garbage, then they're in trouble. Right? If they didn't give it the proper, proper things in charity, whatever. But whatever, it's a different issue. But we say, well, at least they're giving it away. At least they're not, building mansions and 3 mansions and 50 cars and, wasting it this way, that way, the other way. Okay. Depends what they give it to. They can give it to charities that aren't worth anything. Yeah, so then what's the money worth? Right? If they give it to worthwhile things, good. Right? Again, that could be their ticket to the next world. Very well could be. At the same time, at the same time, you have to know where to give it to. And at the same time, if you don't have whatever you can give, or even if you're not obligated to give or you can't give, okay, right? So, you can give charity in other ways. You can help people in other ways, not just with money. But at the end of the day, is that person going to be whistling Dixie and praising God on a regular basis, even if they don't have very much, right? So you tell me, well, that's harder, right? That's harder. Why is it harder? Because you don't have, right? So it would be worse, I would think, or it would be more difficult, right? It would be more difficult to understand for a person to go through if they experience both. Person, let's say, had money, let's say had serious money, and they lost it, or was stolen, or whatever, right? Whatever the case is. So now they're on the other side, right? And someone, let's say, met a number of people, and they said, I'm not, I'm going to be poor, and so I'm going to change in 10 lifetimes. I'll still be poor. Okay, right? That's their trial, or part. It's one of their trials. At the end of the day, it'd be harder for someone who had and now they don't have, and now they struggle to, let's say, cover bills and other things, and they have difficulty. So, and then they see everyone else around them that still has, so that's painful. That can be very hard, right? Because at least they had it once before. See, if a person never had it, okay, so then, as we always say, or as people would say, right? If you never had it, you don't know what it is to miss. So you don't know what you're missing. Okay, that might be the case. But if you had it, you know what you're missing. You know that freedom you had. You can go out and not worry about what you're buying or spending. Okay, that can very well be. That's more painful. And it could be other things around that are also painful. It's the other people that have and they don't care and whatever. You know, that's also part of it. It's also part of the whole. It's also part of the whole test. At the same time, that person now will be more thankful for whatever they do have. They could be bitter. Not seeing the bigger picture. They could be bitter. Very good. They could very well be bitter. Okay, but they now see the bigger picture, and they now see, what it's like not to have. Now you can ask the question, okay, God could have killed them, so instead he took away their money. Okay, but what's the end result over here? Person, the rest of their lives could be bitter. Like someone I know that, they got bad advice or they didn't listen to advice, whatever, and basically went bankrupt. So 15 years later, they still have claims, right? They still have claims, as we said before. Then you got to get out of your system. Okay, it happened. You move on, and it's painful. Different things. I get it, right? But at the end of the day, if a person, let's say, overcame it, but then they didn't struggle afterwards. Let's say they continue to struggle. Yeah, many years later. Okay, but even if that is the case, what did they gain from it? Did they get broken by it, or did they reach higher levels? The Emunah B'tachon, and having faith and belief in God of how He runs the world, and now they're thankful for anything, for a lot of things that happen they never would have been thankful for, and they would have totally taken for granted. So they're going to say, what? God has to put them, like at the bottom, and has to flush them, so to speak, in order for them to see that sometimes, right? But what could be the end result of such a thing? The end result is that person can say, you know what? I was there. I saw it. I, witnessed it, went through it, right? Let's say, and there was hardship. And let's say they're up and downs, further later. Okay. But they can give over when a person should appreciate even when they're down, right? Even when it's hard. Now, the person can't say, well, you don't know what you're talking about. You never went through it. Yeah, but that's not the case over here. If the person went through it, can't they give strength to other people, even if they themselves had difficulty or still have difficulty? Right? The person can't say, well, you're just talking, it's very nice, and you're placating me, whatever. No, you went through it. You had the hardship. And they'll ask, like, so how'd you get through it? What'd you do when you had to, like, 5, 6, 8 bills, you didn't know where money was coming from? I said, you pray a lot better. Right? And you'd be surprised where salvation comes from. Right? As we always say, Yeshua Hashem K'erafayim. Salvation of God comes with the blink of an eyelash. Right? And normally it will come from a place you never thought of. Right? If it was, let's say, a person, let's say, had all these bills to pay, you have no idea where money's coming from. No idea. According to nature, you're in trouble. Yeah, very good. You're in trouble. Now, if you would think, okay, I give my top 10 ideas or responses of where I think, this is going to go and how I'm going to get helped. So in your top 10 responses, the way it probably is going to happen is probably number 257,291. That's going to be the number. That's going to be the number. Oh, I never thought of that. Never thought it could happen this way, right? Salvation comes from a way you never expected. Never expected. Now, there are times as well, things that look good that say, oh, like this could happen, that could happen, it could take me out of this, and then it falls flat. It's like a false alarm. So you get all psyched up for nothing, right? So you say, why would God do that? So it could be God saying, I'm not doing that. I didn't do that. You got yourself psyched up for nothing. It was really nothing. Right? But you made it you thought and made yourself believe that it's really something's going to take you out of it, but it didn't. It was unrealistic, right? God can say that. It's unrealistic. Yeah, that could be. What's another way of looking at it? Another way of looking at it is like this, that, okay, it didn't pan out. Let's say it didn't pan out. Not that it couldn't have. Well, let's say it didn't pan out. Okay. Even if it didn't pan out, what's God showing you? God's showing you it could happen. You're not left in the lurch per se. Okay, this particular thing did not work out. Okay. It didn't work out. Doesn't mean it won't work out. Right? Just like this thing came along out of nowhere, seemingly. And that potentially could have helped you, even if it didn't. Something else will come along the way, which you probably didn't expect, which will help you. Right? But sometimes it may give a person a false sense of security. Right? And, and a person will say, oh, something will come their way, and they'll be pessimistic because, they don't want to get, excited about it and have a big letdown. So they say, it's never going to happen, nothing, this, that. All of a sudden, something does happen. Yeah, it's usually when you least expect it. But even if it's a false alarm, God can still show you, yeah, it could happen. If it sure could happen. Now, it didn't happen with this. Okay. It did happen with this. Right? Does that mean it's not going to happen? You might say, well, it'll never happen. Right? This, according to nature, won't happen. Okay. Right? But you add an opportunity or a potential opportunity where it could have happened. It for sure could have happened. Yeah. Again, let's say it's not unrealistic. Right? Let's say it's not unrealistic. If it's not, if it's not unrealistic, yeah, then you see it could have happened. Then 100% you could see it could have happened. Right? That's the way it goes. But it doesn't mean it won't happen. But then people get psyched out. People say, God's teasing me over here, so to speak. And, it's not necessarily a tease, right? But it is showing you things can change, right? Someone imagines being poor is the most humbling thing. Yeah, it can be. But a person can get fed up and say, I'm sick of living day to day, sick of living, and not knowing where things are coming from. Now, other people may say, yeah, that's part of the challenge. And saying, okay, I'm putting my best foot forward. God, you're going to take care of business, and I'm going to praise you and tell other people what you did over here, because it's totally against nature, right? There are reasons things that happen. Yeah, we're not privy to them, per se, right? We're not saying, well, what if a person, what if they make their own mistakes? That's different, right? That even if they make their own mistakes, interesting, God can say, I didn't tell you to do it. So why are you praying to me to fix it? God could say that. Yeah, but what would our answer be? You invoke divine mercy and say, you're right, I did it. I made the mistake. But I'm invoking mercy that you should help me anyway. Again, it can take longer, take shorter, whatever it is. Right? Whatever it is. Yeah, it's certainly humbling. That's true. But, I don't think people necessarily sign up for it. I don't think they necessarily want it. Doesn't mean a person has to be mega rich. What would most people be happy with? The end of the month. They have a little bit of money in the bank. And they're not in the red and they're paying their bills on time. I think most people would sign up for that. If they got a little bit more, they can put money away, other things, okay. But I think a lot of people would sign up for that. I'd be happy with that. Yeah, especially what's going on in the world today with, expenses skyrocketing and everything else. I think a lot of people would sign up for that. Now, some people may say, I want it to be easier than that. I don't have to live paycheck to paycheck. I don't have to worry if something goes wrong that I have to fix it. And then, a person on a tight budget anyway. Yeah, something happens, right? Something goes wrong with the car, let's say. Now you're out $1,000. Now you're out $700. $700 you didn't really have. You're going to use it for other things. Okay, so that's what it is, right? Sometimes you don't have room for too much error or too many problems, but if it happens, it happens. Right now, some people say, okay, that's where I live. That's where I've been living for years, and it's the way it's been. Now, would they sign up for it to be easier? Sure. In a second, they would sign up for it to be easier. Are they signing up to be mega rich? I don't think they're signing up necessarily for that. But they want to be comfortable. They want to be comfortable. They want to, be able to buy things. They want to think about it. They want to quote unquote enjoy life, right? So to speak. But you're living day to day, it's kind of hard because you're always pressured. A person got $3,000 worth of expenses, and you got $1,500 in the kitty. Plus, you have to have living expenses. According to nature, you're in trouble. That has to work itself out somehow. Somehow it does. Sometimes it's prettier, sometimes not. Some people will say, I don't want this anymore. It's too hard to test. Right? But God bails us out anyway, usually. Right? Maybe the last second, or maybe when we didn't think, okay. You learn to be more thankful, more gracious. That's true. That's true. And some people may say, you know what? Every so often, it doesn't have to be, it has to be once a week or once a month or whatever. Like, once a blue moon, I want to kick back and sip pina colada. We're going to sit back and relax and enjoy. Just like smell the roses a drop. Yeah, I wouldn't sign up for that. Yeah, people want life to be easier. It's true. How much easier, though, should it be? Right? So the problem is when you have too much of something, it's never good. Right? So a person has a lot of money, good, but how much of that gets wasted? Yeah. How many things can you buy or whatever? Some people say, yeah, give me that challenge. I'll deal with it. Money corrupts people. It changes them. Totally changes them. I know people, secular people, didn't change them. They came into money, let's say, they were the same person they were before. Now again, I didn't do a survey or a study. Is that going to be most people? It depends on the person. Some people won't be affected by it. Other people totally changes them. They look at things totally differently. Yeah. Now that they have, they look down on other people. They're conceited. I'm not going to say everybody. I'm going to say across the board. But there are people, yeah. It totally changes them for the negative. It's not good for them. Now, God can give us things. I was reading something earlier. God, from Miles Biederman, should be well. He says God can give a person something they doesn't want to give them. Right? He doesn't want to give them. But the person begs and cries and screams and this and that. So what he does is he gives them anyway. But he knows it's not good for them. So what does he do? So he puts in the world and says, I know it's not going to be good for them. And I know they're going to complain later, and I'll help them then also. But for whatever reason, he gives in and gives to them. I don't say every single case, whatever, but he was saying God can give something to somebody. It's not good for them. But at the same time, he'll help them out of it even when they're in trouble because of it. So the same thing. A person themselves could want, they can want something that's not good for them. Then it causes other problems. And God gives it to them and they pray, to help them in the situation. God can say, I gave you this. This is what you wanted. Right? Now, why are you crying to me? Right? Or let's say you did it to yourself. As we said before, each person does it to themselves. So so God can say, I didn't tell you to do that. You got convinced by the evil inclination. Okay. But I didn't tell you to do it. So you got caught up in it. Okay. You got caught up in it. It's not my fault. But you can still invoke mercy. You can still totally invoke mercy over him. Even though you did it to yourself. But, this is kind of an eye-opener because, a person can complain and complain and complain. God says, okay, I'll give it to you. Knowing that it's bad for them. So now what are they complaining about? They got what they wanted. Right? So says Ramayuch Peterman, he says, yeah, you got what you wanted, and now you're crying because now you have it. And now you want God to take it away. So he said the novelty is, even though God gave it to you and knew it was bad for you, he can also help you in the situation. Right? He's there to help you in the situation even when you fall from it. Right? What's the obvious question? Then why did he give it to you? If he knows it's bad for you, why did he give it to you? He gave it to you because he had mercy. He wanted to give it to you even though he knows it's bad. But he sees in the future. He sees in the future what you're going to gain from it, what's going to happen. Yeah, how it's going to help you, so he gave it to you. But it's beneficial. First of all, a person never had it. He begged for it, he got it. Oh, this is the greatest thing since sliced cheese. And then what happens? And then what happened? Now you're begging for mercy, right? Someone there asked, teach the person a lesson, yeah? You gotta be careful what you ask for. Absolutely, you have to be careful. Now, God can grant it, but it's bad for you. So, what should we pray for? We should pray God give us what He wants us to have. It's a much harder thing because we always think we need more. I mean, we may need more, but we want God to give us what He wants us to have. Not that what we think we need. What God wants us to have. That's a very big difference. So if we're given what God wants us to have, then there's no complaints because God's giving you exactly what you need. You say, my bank account's a little bit low right now. I need a lot more to get through by the end of the month. That's what God wants you to have. So you say, well, I'm going to struggle. Very good. How am I going to make ends meet? Just put your best foot forward. But this is to your benefit. Everything given to us is to our benefit. Again, what's the obvious question? We don't see it that way. We see it as hardship. We see it as difficulty. We see it as getting hit over the head and you're irresponsible and you should have done this. And everybody, everyone's a Monday morning quarterback. Everyone's got an opinion. I saw it on both sides of the coin. When I had money, when I didn't have money. When you had money, you should have done this, that, and the other thing. When you didn't have money, you should have done like you can't speak out of two sides of your mouth. People do it. I called someone on it. I was like, you can't say like this and say like that. They're two opposite things. Two opposite things. Well, people will say that God's using that person to get to you, so they're saying it. They're saying it now. How are you going to deal with it? You're going to get upset, whatever, this, that. So I heard one story. I'll end with this. One story. Someone came to a Rebbe and needed a lot of money. He needed a lot of money for marrying one of his kids. So this Rebbe told him, "I don't give hamlatzos. I don't give letters." So he says, "Why not?" So he asked him again. He said, "I don't give letters." Finally, the Chassid asked his Rebbe, "Why not?" And he said, the reason is because if I give you a letter, you go to a rich person, they look at the letter and they give you pennies, you're going to scream at them. You're totally going to scream at them. So this Chassid said, no, this is what's supposed to come to me. And if that's what's going to be, and so the Rebbe gave him a letter. And he said, you have to understand, if any person only gives you pennies, yeah, you have to say it wasn't designated for him in heaven that he should be the one to help you. He should be the helper, right? He wasn't one of your helpers. And you move on. So he goes to collect money. He goes to this rich person who is a student of this Rebbe also. And he shows him the letter. And he gives him like a little bit of money. And he starts to get angry. He's about to say something, and he says under his breath, okay, this person's not on the list in heaven to help. So the rich person said, what'd you say? He said, no, it's something, it was something between me and that the Rebbe told me, but it was something private. He said, but I heard you say, like, not going to be on the list of heaven, not going to be on the list of, list of this. Like, what are you talking about? So this guy said, again, it was something personal, but, I'm not going to tell you. So I'm not going to tell you what he said. So he said, how much money you need? He said, I'll give you all the money you need. If you tell me. If you tell me what the Rebbe said. So he said, okay. He said, I'll do it, but you have to give me the money first. You have to give me the money first. So he gives him the money. And he said, okay, I'll tell you. The Rebbe said that if I go to someone and they don't help me out or they don't give me a lot of money or whatever, it was destined in heaven that they weren't supposed to. In other words, the person that has certain helpers are going to help him. Some people help more, some people help less, whatever it is. Some people have helpers, right? Everyone has some helpers in heaven. They're on a list. right? They're on a list. So he said, well, when you gave me pennies before, I just figured, okay, you're not on the list. This is what the Rebbe said. Some people are on the list in heaven, and some people are not on the list. So, but I see you're on the list. That's what he told me. He said, I see you're on the list, in heaven to help me. And he helped him, right? So the Biederman telling over the story, he used some other examples also, but, telling over the story, he said, we think, this person's going to help and that person's going to help. This person helped a little bit, this person helped even less, whatever. Okay, but there's a list in heaven. That's what he's telling you. There's a list in heaven. Whoever's going to help the person and however much they're going to help him, they're on a list. Yeah? If they make the list, they'll help you in the way that you need to be helped. If not, they're not on the list. Right? So this Rebbe was teaching his students, this idea that, if you go to someone and they don't give you, or they can't help you, or whatever the case is, they're not on the list. They're not on the list. So what are you going to get upset about? Right? So he gives an example. He gives one other example. He gives a few other examples. Well, whatever. I'll give one other example. He says Moshe Rabbeinu was looking for Chor, right, to help build the Mishkan. Now, so he goes, he says, are you a Chor? He's like, no, my name is Shimon. He's all right, goes the next person. Are you a Chor? He's like, no, my name is, Aminada. Now, is Moshe Rabbeinu going to get upset at these people because they're not Chor? That's not who they are. His name is Shimon. This guy's name is Ruvain. Someone else's name is Aminadab. Whatever it is. But is he going to be upset? They're not the right person. Why aren't they the right person? Because he's looking for someone very specific. And the one very specific person, that's not who they are. So what's he going to get upset about? Right? Now again, we think, I'm going to go to this person, I'm going to go to that person. This person will help me, that person will help me. You have to have Siyat Shema. You have to have heavenly help. Right? If they're not, if they don't give, let's say they don't help you whatever way, then they're not on that list. Then you couldn't have expected anything otherwise. What are you getting upset about? Right? Let's say a person was in dire straits, they needed a loan, right? Use this as an example. They needed a loan. They go to somebody to sign as an Arif, as a guarantor. Now a lot of people don't like to sign. Guy doesn't pay it back, and they may have to pay it back, whatever. So let's say they go to someone and they don't want to sign. They say, no, I'm not signing. Not because of you, they just say, I don't sign in general. Now you can sit there and say, I really need it, I really need your help, whatever. Yeah, so you can be very, very upset. Right? So what's Rabbi Biederman teaching you over here? So he's teaching you this person's not the right address. So what are you getting upset about? You're looking for Shimon and his name is Ruvain. What are you getting upset about? But I really need the help. This person really going to help me. Or someone else going to really help me. Okay, they could. But they're not on the list. And if they're not on the list, what are you getting upset about? There's no point to get upset. Why? You find someone who's on the list. Right? You're looking for the wrong person. Okay. So you can say, I asked a lot of people, they're all the wrong people, right? They were all the wrong people. True. Until you find the right person. All right, I'm gonna stop here. I just every Sunday, 2 o'clock Eastern time. 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock Eastern time. Usually 4 o'clock Israel time, which it was 3 o'clock here. So it's going to change back to normal time for anyone who doesn't change the clocks. Because next week, the end of this week, we're changing the clocks. If anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, Orthodox Conversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos on Q&As, ethics on fathers, book of Leviticus. Want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBICHAIMCOFFMAN @gmail.com.